Okay, hi. Sorry. I did not realize that I was live. Um, so hello, welcome to uh, ACAB True Crime. Today I'm gonna try to actually I'm just gonna put this down. And then I'm just gonna pull it up. So I'm gonna try not to I'm just gonna try to present this and not try to look at any comments. Um, and it's just easier, I think, for me to do this live so then I don't become a perfectionist and have to keep going back and starting over again because then I'll just never get anything published. But I think I have found so yeah, so I'm gonna do the live and then hopefully just be able to present the information that I have and then have it be out there. Um so I'm just not gonna think about it because I am a little bit nervous. But yeah, I am gonna use this live to talk about Idaho 4, and I have been doing some research and I have found some interesting things that I think I've I'm pretty sure that this is what has been happening in the Idaho 4 case, and I think it's a little bit of a precursor leading up to or a pre-leader thing to get us to the hearing that's happening on Thursday. And I actually think that the Idaho police have falsified information. I think I kind of know how they falsified information. And yeah, I have also just so many other things that I have done together, like evidence and research that just over the last, almost year and a half with this thing. So I do have a lot of information. And I would like to just start getting it out there. So this is just going to be kind of a trial for me to get the information out there. And this is a good place to start just because there is going to be that hearing on Thursday, which I plan to go live for. And I think that if I go over this information now, that will help people maybe get a little bit of a grasp on what is going on Thursday and why I think that Ann Taylor is going to pretty much say that the state has falsified information, data. So I guess I'm trying to figure out how the best way to go about this would be. And I, uh, yeah, I'm just wondering. Okay, so there's 2 different things. So there's 2 things that are happening on this, on this Thursday's hearing. So it's, about the CAS data, which is about the, um, cellular analysis, something or other. Um, and they also are gonna be talking about the, um, DNA for it and the use of IgG. So, I guess okay, so I think I started reading I'm just gonna present this, and it's a couple of, articles, and I kinda took a video of it while I was reading it because I knew that I wouldn't be able to access these articles again because I think the Idaho Statesman, you have to pay for it or something, but I'll just play that, and then maybe that will remind me a little bit of what I can focus on because I feel yeah, I don't exactly know where to start, so I'm gonna try to share oops, my screen. Let's see. What? Damn. Oh, here it is. Okay, so like I said, this is just a video from the Idaho Statesman, but I will go ahead and play it and then pause it and talk about it as things go along. Okay, actually, this is a better idea of me doing it. I'm going to read this out loud and then I'll have it. Then, if you're watching, you can also read it, but I'm going to read this out loud. Okay, so it says for the first time, this is from the Idaho Statesman, and I guess I don't know what day it's from. That was stupid. Um, or what the article is called either. But yeah, so this is what it says. It says for the first time, prosecutors in the University of Idaho student homicides case have acknowledged that investigators employed an advanced DNA technique more commonly used in cold cases to land on Bryan Kohburger as a suspected killer. Okay, so that's super important. The FBI, so okay, the FBI submitted DNA found at the Moscow crime scene to one or more public genealogy databases to establish familial ties to the alleged perpetrator, according to newly released court records. Since the since deleted DNA profile that federal agents created on online services. Okay, so let's break this down. So it says the FBI submitted DNA. So okay, why is the FBI involved? First of all, I thought this was like the state's case, so that's curious. But the FBI submitted DNA found at the Moscow crime scene to one or more public genealogy databases to establish familial ties to the alleged perpetrator. Okay, so that's interesting. I'd like to know like exactly how they did that. It says the since deleted DNA profile that federal agents created on online service. Okay, this is so weird. The since deleted DNA profile that the federal agents created on online services, oh, it says like Ancestry.com or 23andMe, it resulted in the lead that pointed law enforcement to Kohburger, Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson wrote. Okay, so that's illegal. And unless they somehow went like above and beyond like actual constitutional rights, like what is it, the Fourth Amendment? No, yeah, the amendments. Um, let's look that up actually. Because I just wanna because I'm pretty sure, let's see, what is the Fourth Amendment? Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Exactly. Oh, okay. Exactly. So the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures should not be violated. Okay. So, I mean, we can get a lot more into that, but on its basic level, it's saying so what the FBI did with Bryan Kohburger's DNA would be considered an unreasonable search. What did they have to why did they have Brian's DNA in the first place? Like, they're lying. Like, I mean, it's just like, you can't enter okay. So and that's the thing that alright, sorry. I'm just, like, going all over the place because it's just a lot of information. I'm trying to figure out, like, how to best explain this, but I should just assume that you guys are smarter than, I, like, don't need to be that in detail when I explain this stuff, but I think or that you'll get the connection as this goes along, but let me then play. So the other day too, I was going through I thought it was relevant because I was doing research for the case last Thursday for the DNA or not for the DNA for the Kohberger hearing on Thursday. And I was going like doing some research about like why because I was hearing some people talking about how DNA might be an issue and like why they might be talking about that at the court case. And then to be honest, I haven't really, like, kept up a lot with some of the going-ons, but, yeah, so maybe some people that are listening to this might know more than me, but about that specifically, but I think I found some, like, really good information, so I ended up, like, looking through different videos or, like, writings and found a very informative video on, I think Harvard lawyer Lee her uh her YouTube page. So I think what I'm gonna do in this video is just like go over that video and then kind of talk about how it connects to what they're talking about um in these cases. So well maybe I'll just yeah. Okay, I'm gonna do that because it's just so messed up. I think and maybe I can talk this out and, like, write it out when I'm doing this too. Because I mean, I think I've, like, watched stuff and then I'm like, "Yeah, that makes sense," and then I'm like, "Did I actually put that all together in the right way?" So, I'm gonna pull up I'm gonna stop sharing oh, wait, um, sorry, bear with me. Okay, I didn't realize you couldn't see my face. Hold on. Oops. Alright, I'll do that. Oh, I was gonna say one other thing too, is that I, have been kind of nervous about how to present this information and just going forward, and I do feel like I sound pretty stupid right now or whatever, but I do feel like I have really good information to put out there, so I'm trying to enter things with, like, more confidence, and I'm kind of into astrology, and today, I have this calendar that talks about it, like, what the moon cycle is today and, like, how you should use it for your benefit, and today is Tuesday, May 28th, and it says a lovely link between Mercury, communications, and Saturn, truth, means that it's going to be easier to speak your truth today under the Aquarius moon. What do you need to say? And so that just like really motivated me to decide to talk about this today. And I'm gonna just try to keep that in mind, and that's why I put on my name down here for to be the speaker of truth. Just today, speaker of her truth today. But I do feel like this is true just in general, but I feel like a lot of people aren't going to agree with me. So you can take it as my truth because then you just don't have to accept that it's truth, but just know that this shit's true. But, anyways, so I'm going to stop sharing this and then I'm going to add on, let's see, the crap. I haven't found it yet. That was stupid. I didn't think I was going to do this video like right away. So I didn't. Let me pull up. Bear with me, please. I'm gonna go to my history. Okay. If other people, if you guys are into like other true crime stuff, I also, for some reason, kind of got interested in this like Nick Rekieta arrest. He's like a streamer on YouTube, and that's been kind of interesting. He's from Minnesota, where I am also from, and it's just kind of like he was like a really successful streamer, but he was like super like right wing libertarian. But sometimes it was just like interesting to hear him talk, and he got like arrested this weekend for doing like a bunch of stuff, and I don't know, it was kind of crazy, but and part of me I was like, yeah. Anyways, I won't do that part, but let's see. Trying to get into how much did I watch this weekend? I guess I haven't watched this YouTube video in a while. What the hell? Oh, and the Micah. Oh, here we go. Okay, here we go. Let me. All right, my bad. Thank you again for bearing with me. Let's see, where all the fuck do I? Here we go. All right. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to play this and then we can talk about it. I'll pause it and talk about it, but yeah. But I think this is again important background to have in order to know uh why it's illegal, the DNA that they're using for Kohburger right now. And like why it was illegal the way that they collected it and why we should care too. Like it should definitely matter to us.
Hi, y'all, and welcome to the live stream. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the case of Bryan Kohburger. As you know, he's been accused of murdering 4 University of Idaho college students in the middle of the night in the house where 3 of them live. The 4 students, and I always try to name them because it's also about them. This is not just about Bryan Kohburger, are Kaylee Gonsalves, Maddie Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. DNA has been an absolutely huge.
Yo, okay, so here's the other thing too. Today I was doing some other research. Well, actually I tried to like record this earlier and I got kind of nervous, but the thing that I was recording, I was like trying to give I was going to do like a podcast and I was like going to give a little background on the case. And then I was like trying to figure out how to spell their names and to like talk about them and I found an article that was from Kaylee's family and I realized her sister's name is spelled alive, like so her name's Olivia, like what you would think would normally be like Olivia, but her name is actually spelled like Olivia, like Alive, like alive. Like I just thought that that was a little like ironic. But speaking of names,
huge part of that case. It's been extremely important. But there's a lot about that that's hard to understand. There's a lot that isn't well known. To help us understand these issues, we have a very special guest tonight. CC Moore is founder of DNA Detectives. She is the only genetic genealogist to star in her own TV series on ABC, The Genetic Detective. She's a non-resident fellow of the Dubois Research Institute at Harvard's Hutchins Center. She's the chief genetic genealogist for Paraben Nanolabs. The name of that alone is just amazing. Heading their division that services law enforcement. And in the 2 years since Paraben and CC launched that division, it has over 200 successful identifications of violent criminals. And she was just telling me tonight, 70 convictions have emerged related to the IgG she does. And we're going to talk about all that, unpack it. Don't worry if you don't understand everything yet. CC's work has led to the first conviction of somebody using investigative genetic genealogy, the first conviction through a jury verdict, and the first exoneration in a criminal case where all of those where the suspect was identified through investigative genetic genealogy. Now, on a personal note, CC, one of our subscribers, Maureen, great at explaining, things. So I wanted to
cover. Okay, so just kind of what she went over there is like all that she just explained. That was all. If they use investigative genealogy, like as CC Moore is going to explain, and I feel like Harvard lawyerly, I don't really watch her much in this video. I'm sure she did ask some of like appropriate questions during this interview, but like she did not really address like the huge constitutional issues like with this type of identification and searching process. So I just feel like it's very important to highlight those things, and again, like we'll apply them back to what they're going to be asking for and talking about on the case on Thursday. And by the way, I don't know, I've said this earlier, but I'm not watching the chat right now because I just get nervous, but I also don't want to just make a video because I would like try to be a perfectionist about it and then just never publish it. So that's why I'm going live right now. But yeah, and then the other thing that I was going to say about this was okay, I can't remember.
Cover 5 basic areas. The first is I want to talk about how genetic genealogy works. And you've given us some slides that we're going to go through, and that'll help you explain to us how it works. I also want to talk about the reliability of it and whether the reliability even matters. And then I want to talk about some specific questions that some of the subscribers had about the Kohburger case. And then how these issues are playing out in discovery in that case, which has been really interesting. And then I want to talk about some of the privacy issues, some of the controversies, and just get your opinions on all of that. So is that good?
It sounds good. And I think the reason some of your listeners suggested me is because I see a big part of my job is educating the public, educating law enforcement, educating attorneys and judges. And so that is something I put a lot of.
Okay, here's something else that, again, what I take from this interview that is like super problematic to me is she is like the lady that invented this shit. She invented IgG and she's the one training everyone on it too. So it's like, where's the checks and balances there? Like, how does this woman that doesn't have any background? I mean, she sounds like she'll get into it later, but she really doesn't have much training. It's like all self-taught training, which I'm all about and I'm cool with that. But like, I just feel like if we're going to be like making huge like decisions that go against the Constitution, like we should be using like more validated information, like period. So, but yeah. And she also, I mean, whatever, I shouldn't make comments about like someone's like, personality or whatever, but it is just a little concerning, like how much, this CC Moore lady, like just loves educating everyone and thinks that she's like, very helping people out. You'll just see as it goes along that she doesn't know, she doesn't understand what she's talking about. So, okay. Anyways.
Effort into. So I'm glad that people have noticed my efforts in that area.
Yeah, and they definitely have. So I want to talk about something. First, I want to start with what I think you're not involved in, and you tell me if this is right and help me understand if I have a little bit of this wrong, because I'm trying to learn. I think that a couple of things happen before you or someone who is working on the IgG part gets involved. Someone goes to the scene and collects DNA. That's law enforcement. That's not your role. And then there's a lab that analyzes the DNA. And then you get involved. Is that fair?
That's correct. But there's actually 2 iterations of DNA analysis before I would get involved. So you're right. They have the crime scene investigators. They collect evidence. And then that evidence is going to go to the crime lab. And if they find any DNA of an unknown or unknown individuals, they will run what's called STRs. That's the type of profile that's court admissible that has been used by law enforcement for decades. But that is
okay. Listen to what she just said. Okay. So, and I wrote some of this stuff down too. Actually, I was like, maybe I'm not gonna need my notes, but I'm gonna use them. So, so I always take a lot of notes and I never use them. So let's see here. All right. So yeah, I took a bunch of notes actually. So what she just said is like STM. It stands for okay, let me go back. What did she say?
And that'll help you explain to us how it works.
Okay.
I also want to talk about the reliability.
But that is not compatible for genetic genealogy. So if they
Okay, this is so important. Damn it. Why am I so bad at this? Ugh. Oh my god, seriously. Play. Motherfucker.
Fair?
That's correct, but there's actually 2 iterations of DNA analysis before I would get involved. So you're right, they have the crime scene investigators, they collect evidence, and then that evidence is going to go to the crime lab. And if they find any DNA of an unknown or unknown individuals, they will run what's called STRs. That's the type of profile that's court admissible that has been used.
Okay, so she said STRs. So that is a type of DNA. Oh my god, what is my fucking computer doing right now? It's so annoying. I'm sorry. So STRs is like this type of DNA that she said right there, and I think she does know what she's talking about here. In that, I think she legally understands, but she doesn't like really understand it. But again, like, so the STR is what's collected, and it's like a very basic form of DNA, so it doesn't hold a lot of information on it, and that is what has legally been allowed. Like, so this is back in the 70s, as she said, like that they decided to start using this. So that's the only thing that like our court system has been like approved to use federally. And I think that it sounds like, I guess I haven't looked into state by state, and that would be important to do. And it sounds like some state by state stuff, there hasn't been anything that has actually changed like these laws yet to allow a greater like the next form that she's talking about, the IgG. What IgG needs, which, by the way, like, IgG is kind of just like a bullshit, name to sound like, really smart, which is like all these stupid names that these cop places like use, and they don't all like mean anything too. Same with trainings. They'll be like, "Oh, I've had all these trainings," and it's like, dude, like, so I mean, I went to grad school for clinical psychology, and I worked in a bunch of prisons, and like so to do that, I had to have literally like thousands and thousands of hours worth of training, supervised training, like, professional experience. Like, I mean, it's just a ton of training. And like when they go up on these stands, these cops, they'll be like, "Oh, and like, what's your training background?" Da, da, da. And like, they'll be like, "Oh, I went to like, a training one weekend or something," or maybe they'll list off like 10 of them, but it like you find out that actually like each of those trainings were only like 20 minutes long. And like this, it just, and then they come up with all these like floofy names that like really don't mean anything. And like this is an example of that, just in my opinion, of like investigative genetic genealogy, like it's like, okay, whatever. But so, and basically what it is her just creating family trees for people. Like, I mean, she's probably someone that was like interested, in doing family tree shit, and like realized like how she could apply this to like true crime shit. Like, I feel like that's maybe how she like got into it. And now she's like the head of like this entire department that they're using. So let's just get into it again. But
by law enforcement for decades. But that is not compatible for genetic genealogy. So if they upload that profile to the law enforcement databases, CODIS, and they don't get a hit, then that's when they would turn to investigative genetic genealogy. If they get a match in the law enforcement database, then they don't need us. So we only are going to be involved after that point if that doesn't happen. Then they have to send us some of that evidence, that biological evidence, because we can't use that traditional STR profile. We have to have what's called a SNP profile, a single nucleotide polymorphism profile. And there are, at this point, no crime labs in the United States that are capable of creating that. So it has to go to a third-party private lab to create that SNP profile. There's 2 different ways they can do it. There's microarray, where they just pull out those 800,000 approximately genetic markers and create a file, or they can do a whole genome sequence where they analyze the entire genome of that unknown individual, but they're still going to pull out those compatible SNPs. And what makes a SNP compatible for genetic genealogy is if it's one that is tested by the commercial DNA testing companies, because those are the files we're going to be comparing.
Yeah. So what she just said is that, dude, this is all so backwards. So she said that basically the government can't use the DNA. Okay. So basically I'm trying to figure out a way to like say this that makes sense, like with an example. So she's basically saying that, let's say, okay, let's just use Bryan Kohburger's case as an example. So they found this person's unknown DNA on the knife sheath. Okay. Knife sheath. But it sounds like because it was touch DNA, they probably didn't have enough information in the DNA to like create this. Well, shit. Yeah. They didn't have enough. Okay. I don't think it would matter that it has touch DNA. So, okay, scratch that. But like, if Bryan Kohberger, we have his DNA on the sheath, or we have someone's DNA on the sheath. Let's just say someone's DNA on the sheath. And then they run it through CODIS. They like their lab does the thing and they end up coming up with like the STR thing. And then they put it into CODIS and it doesn't hit on anything. So then like that's legally all they can do. But what they're doing now is like behind like the doors, like, I don't know, on the DL, or like they're going, so these detectives are going to then contact these other labs that do deal with the type of DNA that they need in order to like find the genetic genealogy stuff. I feel like I'm doing a really shitty job like explaining this, but yeah, and so they basically take this DNA, it doesn't match with anyone, and then they send it to these other companies, and then these other companies end up doing basically a background search. Like they end up like, it's like that one show, like Find Your Roots or whatever. Like if you can submit your DNA to those sites, 23andMe is like another one, like all those things. But this is like the government is doing it for you. Like the government is taking your DNA and it's like putting it into all these databases and like figuring out like where it hits like with different things. And like a lot of sites, 23andMe and all those other sites, like haven't allowed that to happen, which is good for now. And they'll get into this later in this like interview too. But yeah, I don't know. But that's not supposed to be allowed. And if you do, you have to get like a special judge's order in order to do that. So
if you spit in a tube and you mail it into, say, Ancestry DNA, they're going to test about 700,000 of your genetic markers. So we want to use as many of those same genetic markers as we can in our analysis, because we want to have a really good overlap so we can get high confidence comparisons. So once that file is created by the lab, our bioinformatics scientists will then go in and work with it, because we're often working with degraded DNA or mixtures, especially in violent crimes. We're often seeing in sexual assaults, for instance, you're going to see mixtures in a lot of those. So our scientists have to work at deconvoluting that and extracting out the victim's DNA from the perpetrator, or the alleged perpetrator's DNA at that point. And then once all of that is done and it's uploaded to the two databases, or one of the two databases we're allowed to use, then my work starts. And so I do want to make the point that even though there are over 40 million people that have taken commercial DNA tests, the largest databases have barred law enforcement's use. So we are limited to the two smallest databases, which are GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. And so those are the only databases where it's going to be compared. And I will get a match list from one or both of those, depending if we upload to just one or two. But those are the only two we're allowed to use. That match list is then how I start my work.
Okay, let me ask you sort of a foundational question. Why is the SMP not compatible with what law enforcement
This is
uses?
the stupidest answer.
Why is it
Listen to the
happen
answer
that
she
way,
gives.
or why are they different?
It's just a different type of genetic marker. And traditionally, law enforcement has used STRs, which are short tandem repeats. It was just a choice that was made decades ago when
it's like what
genetic
they legally
technology
decided.
was a lot newer. Now we have much more advanced genetic technology. I don't even know if SNPs were being tested back then, if that was even possible. The reason SNP testing really became popular and effective is because it was being used for GWAS studies, which is genome-wide association studies where they were using it to study health conditions. So if you and I both had a certain health condition, they would test our DNA to see if they could figure out what gene or genes were responsible for that. Or if once they had that determined, they could test people and tell them if they were at high risk for a certain medical condition. And so that is what ended up being used by the commercial DNA testing companies because it provided so much more information. STRs were partially chosen because they were believed to be junk DNA. They were supposed to give very little information about anyone. It's just the combination of those markers is unique.
Doesn't she realize what she's saying is illegal? Like, does the government know that she made this video? Like, what the hell?
And that would help us determine whether the DNA came from someone, but it wouldn't tell you about their health or their appearance or even their ancestry. And so now we're using these genetic markers that tell you much more about a person, and we're also using almost 1 million of them. And so that is why we're able to expand the search from law enforcement can only do a search for very close relatives or that individual in their database. If the state allows it, they can do what's called familial search, and they can look for first-degree relatives to that unknown person. But some states don't even allow that. So the main thing they're doing with those STRs is a one-to-one comparison. Is this the same person? But with SNP profiles, because we have so much more information, we can find second, third, fourth, fifth cousins and beyond. And that is what gives genetic genealogy the power to make these potential identifications.
Let's talk about sort of how you do it. Let's look at
No,
some
no, no, no.
zillion
Okay, see,
cases on
that's like
India.
that's the part that's like,
This
no,
is
how do
kind
you
of new.
just
There's
like
not a
listen
lot
to
of
that and move
established
on? Like,
law
what the
about what
hell?
gets
Like,
discovered or what.
okay, so it's like, I'm sorry, I'm so bad with this. And she goes into, so like now she starts explaining stuff that honestly like doesn't really matter, but so okay, like what she basically explained was that like if they put it in CODIS, and like she already said it, in only some states they allow like familial testing, which is one generation for someone's DNA, and that's like in maybe these databases or whatever. Well, it sounds like if you send it to a different lab that like isn't run by the government, like then somehow like you can like use that information legally, but it's like why? Why is that allowed? I don't understand why, like, do people know that that's being done? Like, I'm sure they wouldn't, like, give consent to that if they knew, because 'cause it'd be the perpetrator, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems super, super shady, and so what she's saying is that it goes to these places, and then they, like, run it into this system where they have this DNA database, and if they find a match, it's usually, like, 3 or 4 generations back. So then I was like, "Well, what is the data that they're using for this? Like, are these databases, you know, s like, why have those been allowed?" And it makes me think that, or it made me think like they probably actually um you know if these like matching relatives are so far back, then it's probably from the generations of someone like in their 30s, or like from the 1930s or something. Like maybe like collecting, she's like, if it for certain conditions, and it's like, okay, are you talking about conditions like like measles or something, or like polio, which is they like literally like collected information on like everyone. So I ended up, okay, I looked up, let me share this with you guys. Okay. I ended up looking up because I was like, Let's get to the bottom of this." So she called it genome-wide association studies. So it's GWAS or something. Okay, where is the video? Okay, here we go. All right, so I'm gonna change the presentation. I will share. I guess this. Okay. Can I just do like a full screen thing? I guess not. Oh shit. I hope. Okay. So, anyways, my bad. What the fuck? Okay. Alright. Jeez Louise, my god. Okay. So it says, is the sharing? Yeah. Oh wait, no, it's not. Oh wait, is it? Yeah, it is. All right. So genome-wide association studies test hundreds of thousands of genetic variants across many genomes to find those statistically associated with the specific trait or disease. Okay, so okay. This methodology has generated a myriad of robust associations for a range of traits and diseases, and the number of associated variants is expected to grow steadily as GWAS sample sizes increase. Okay, so who are the samples? Like, why are we expecting them to increase? Like, are more people consenting to have this information be used, like, against them criminally? It says Jawa's results have a range of applications, such as gaining insight into a phenotype's underlying biology, estimating its heritability, calculating genetic correlations, making clinical risk predictions, informing drug development programs, seriously? And inferring potential causal relationships between risk factors and health outcomes. In this primer, we will provide the reader with an introduction to JOAs, explaining their statistical basis and how they are conducted. Describe state-of-the-art approaches and discuss limitations and challenges, concluding with an overview of the current and future applications of JOAs results. Okay, so that basically is like, I feel like all lying. So they're well, I don't know. This all seems like propaganda to me. So they're like a phenotype's underlying biology, estimating its heritability, calculating genetic conditions. So that's basically like, okay, what I think about when I think of this, I think of Hitler and World War II and like having that type of information where you can literally like take someone's DNA and find out like, oh, did they have like any like blood that related to red hair? Because like, let's make sure, we don't trust the gingers, like let's kill all the gingers or something. I don't trust people with this like information. And it's like, are these people actually giving consent to this? They're like making clinical risk predictions. Like, what does that mean? Like, I guess like that would probably be like if you test your DNA and finding out like if you have like breast cancer or something, if you're like likely to have breast cancer. But I could see them and they're already doing it here with, criminal investigations. Also, this informing drug development program seems super shitty too, which I mean, that's fine. Like, it's kind of like, oh, is there like one type of like medicine that works better like in a certain family or like a certain type of you know category of people or something, but also again like I just feel like it's too risky to have like that information out there. um yeah, and then talking about health outcomes, so I mean I think it can be used in a positive way, but again you can't trust the government because look at what they're already doing it with right now. Okay, so I don't know if I really, maybe I'll read this and like address it again, like in a live that I do in the future. But like I do just kind of I mostly wanted to find out where they got these sample sizes for the information. So let's see. I think I found it real quick. No, okay, it's up here. Experimentation. So collection of DNA and phenotypic information from a group of individuals, such as disease status, demographic information such as age and sex, and genotyping of each individual using available GWAS arrays or sequencing strategies. Quality control. So, okay, I'm just like really trying to break this down because they do try to like, I mean, it's obviously like kind of confusing language, but I mean, I've actually had a couple of like studies published and it's so annoying to me, like how much people try to sound so smart, like in these articles. It's like, do we want to actually share this information with the public or do we want to just like stay up in our little ivory castles and like hoard all of the information to ourselves and then use it in like, malicious or deceptive ways? Like, for example, what they're doing with Brian's shit. So, let's see it. Okay. Here we go. Pre-existing. Okay, they say sample size. Okay, here. The choice of data, resource, and study design for a GWAS depends on the required sample size, the experimental question, and the availability of pre-existing data, or the ease in which new data can be collected. JAWS can be conducted using data from resources such as biobanks. Okay, what's a biobank? Or cohorts with disease-focused or population-based recruitment. Okay, you know what this reminds me of? Have you guys heard of like the Tuskegee studies? Let me look that up real quick. So that was okay. The government collects information and they say they're going to use it for one thing and then they don't. And then they use it for other fucked up shit. And like an example of that happening, or like this is awful. Tuskegee. Here we go. In 1932, the United States Public Health System, working with the Tuskegee Institute, began a study to record the natural history of syphilis. It was originally called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. Okay, what you ask? Yeah. So what they did is they like chose, you know, a group. Basically, they took, and what's so fucked up is these dudes. So they were like, let's just do it in black men. It's like, okay, why? Like, because obviously they don't want to do it to white people because they're all white. So then they're like, you know, um, they take the sample size and then it says the study initially involved. Oh wait, I should share this window. Hold on. Oh fuck. Oh, sorry, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's present. Here we go. Okay. The study initially involved 600 black men, 399 with syphilis, 201 who did not have the disease. Patients were informed consent was not collected, so they didn't know that this information was being collected on them. The researchers told the men that they were being treated for bad blood, a local term to describe several ailments, including syphilis and anemia and fatigue. In exchange for taking part in the study, the men received free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance. Burial insurance, what the fuck? So they lied about it. And when they found this group of black men, they ended up like finding out that there was such like syphilis, or a treatment for it, which was penicillin. And they basically, I'm sorry, I need to find like a better explanation of this. Let's go to Wikipedia or some shit. Okay, so there was no cure for syphilis. Okay, I'm gonna go. This is the History Channel. In order to track the disease's full progression, researchers provided no effective care as the study's African American participants experienced severe health problems, including blindness, mental impairment, or death. So they knew that there was a treatment, but they just wanted to see, for experimental purposes, what would happen if you just let it go untreated. And they didn't tell these dudes that they were doing it, and they like lied to them. And so I can almost guarantee you that if they were taking, there's like a lot of people in the past, like again, people like, I think a lot of people agreed to do that for COVID, like allowed to be tracked, like for certain vaccines and stuff. And these people are like kind of allowing the government to like, they think they're using it for like they think they're doing it for a good purpose, but then it ends up being that the government uses it for something that they actually aren't using it for. So this is just one example of that. And probably the type of biobanks that they're getting it from is people like this. And I really do want to get to the bottom of it, and I want to know like who actually is like the people that it would be really nice to know what specific data banks they're using and why. And like, I don't know why.
The NAACP. On February 12th, 1909,
Yes.
what is now the nation's oldest and largest grassroots civil rights organization.
Yeah. Oh. All right. And then we'll go back to the video. Oh, I have to share that.
have much more advanced genetic technology. I don't even know if SNPs were being tested back then, if that was even possible. The reason SNP testing really became popular and effective is because it was being used for GWAS studies, which is genome-wide association studies, where they were using it to study health conditions. So if you and I both had a certain health condition, they would test our DNA to see if they could figure out what gene or genes were responsible for that. Or if once they had that determined, they could test people and tell them if they were at high risk for a certain medical condition. And so that is what ended up being used by the commercial DNA testing companies, because it provided so much more information. STRs were partially chosen because they were believed to be junk DNA. They were supposed to give very little information about anyone. It's just the combination of those markers is unique, and that would help us determine whether the DNA came from someone, but it wouldn't tell you about their health or their appearance or even their ancestry. And so now we're using these genetic markers that tell you much more about a person, and we're also using almost 1 million of them. And so that is why we're able to expand the search from law enforcement can only do a search for very close relatives or that individual in their database. If the state allows it, they can do what's called familial search, and they can look for first-degree relatives to that unknown person. But some states don't even allow that. So the main thing they're doing with those STRs is a one-to-one comparison. Is this the same person? But with SNP profiles, because we have so much more information, we can find second, third, fourth, fifth cousins and beyond. And that is what gives genetic genealogy the power to make these potential identifications.
Let's talk about sort of how you do it. Let's look at some of your slides. I'm going to put out the first slide that you sent, the snippet of raw data. Is this what you get from law enforcement when you're about to start the portion you're going to do? Do you get something that looks like this?
No. So in order to create this, law enforcement has to send us the biological evidence. So they have to have DNA remaining, because we can't use that STR profile for genetic genealogy. So if they've used up all the DNA or it's been lost, which happens in some cold cases, unfortunately, we can't do anything. So first they have to send the DNA or the DNA extract from their biological evidence to our lab. Then our lab is going to create a file similar to this. They're going to say, okay, here are the SNPs for these 850,000 locations on the genome. So you'll see chromosome right there, and then it says 1. These are SNPs or genetic markers on chromosome 1. And you can see their position and then the genotype. Most people listening probably know our DNA is made up of A, T, C's, and G's. And everyone's going to have a unique combination of which A, T, C's, and G's make up their genetic blueprint. And so this is what our lab is going to look for. They're going to look for these 850,000 or so different positions on the genome, on the DNA, and then read it. So what they're reading is that genotype column. And they're saying, okay, at this location, this person has an A and an A. In this next location, they have a G and a G, and so on. What we're going to do with this is now compare it to everybody else's SNPs. And we're not looking for single marker matches. Like with STR profiles, they're just looking for exact matches at each location. Instead, we're looking for long blocks of identical DNA. So it doesn't matter if someone just has a few of these the same, and they will, because there's only 4 different letters you can have. So you are going to have some of the same with everyone. But what we're looking for are long stretches of identical segments where 2 people will have the exact same genotype for hundreds or thousands of SNPs. And we call them blocks of DNA. The reason that's significant is because the only reason 2 people would share these blocks of DNA is if they inherited that DNA from a common ancestor. And so that's what my work is based on, is looking for people who have common ancestors with this unknown individual.
So how many, let's say you got all the way down to siblings, how many of the genotypes are they going to have in common?
That's a great question. So with our full siblings, we share about 50% of our DNA on average. So you're going to, so there's about 3,600 centimorgans. Centimorgans are the unit of measurement of how much DNA 2 people share when you're doing this type of testing. And so siblings are going to share about 50% of all of these genotype SNPs. But again, remember, everyone shares a huge percentage of DNA. So these markers are chosen because these are ones that mutate. So these are the highly changeable portions of our DNA. So you're going to share 99.9% of your DNA with all humans, right? But these portions of our DNA are the ones that change quickly. And for these, you're going to share about half with your siblings. So you're going to see long stretches of identical DNA with siblings. It's a little bit easier to explain it with parents. So you see how there's 2 alleles or genetic markers at each location under genotype, you get one of those from your mom and one from your dad at every single location. And that's because you get one chromosome, one from mom and one from dad. And so when you compare a parent and a child, they're going to share all the way across each chromosome, right? You'll have one entire chromosome shared with mom and one entire chromosome shared with dad. And so if you lined up a parent's genotype results next to this one, you would see one of those letters, at least, is going to match on every single location. And that's the same way that they actually do the matching with STRs. But with STRs, you just need to share one of each of those 20 genetic markers to be a parent-child. On these, you have to share one on each 850,000 of these lines. So this is showing you a tiny portion. This would scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll for almost 850,000 lines, right? And then there's 2 at each location. So it's reading 1.7 million of these genotypes. And that's why this type of testing is so much more confident than the traditional type of testing that has been used.
Oh my God. Why does it keep doing that? That's so infuriating. My God. So, oh my God, that really pisses me off. What am I doing wrong with this? Oops.
Have proven to be very unique and very, very high confidence. I think we've all heard when they say there's a 1 in 312 to prove their father's American. So if their father—
Oh, this is such a bullshit example.
Would you say that this is more reliable than STR, which has traditionally been used by law enforcement?
Okay. That they actually do the matching with STRs. But with STRs, you just need to share one of each of those 20 genetic markers to be a parent-child. On these, you have to share one on each 850,000 of these lines.
So again, she's basically just explaining how they can go outside of government. This is complete government overreach. The government is, when we only wanted it to be reserved for familial, so that's literally like 50% of your DNA would have to match. Like this person, like they're now able to look for 850,000 to 1 of that match. So like they are going so beyond the scope of like what has actually been decided for.
So this is showing you a tiny portion. This would scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll for almost 850,000 lines, right? And then there's 2 at each location. So it's reading 1.7 million of these genotypes. And that's why this type of testing is so much more confident than the traditional type of testing that has been used for paternity tests, for immigration, and for evidence in court.
Would you say that this is more reliable than STR, which has traditionally been used by law enforcement?
Yes, it is. And so the law has lagged behind technology, and that STRs are still what is used as evidence in court for paternity and for immigration, which can be an issue if you don't have a first-degree relative. So, for instance, I've worked with a lot of people from Vietnam who were fathered by American soldiers, and they are entitled to U.S. citizenship, but they have to prove their father's American. So if their father is—
Oh, I think I found a way that I won't have to screw it up again. What is total bullshit about her using this example is that, like, I'm sure that they've only, like, they've chosen to, like, tell her to only use this as an example because they're like, this actually shows that we're helping people. Like, we want to get people citizenship instead of being like, we actually want to, you know, get you guys in trouble and put you behind bars or lock you up or, you know, whatever. Like, you know, another example for ways that the government has like not used the DNA well of other people is like when they kind of were like, oh yeah, you have to prove in order to get this like amount, like they're gonna make it sound like good, like you need to have this da da da. But I mean, really, like they are trying to find ways to like exclude you from getting stuff too. So like, you know, when it comes to like the giving Native Americans, letting them like make a certain amount of money, they also like are like off of the, if they were not make a certain amount of money but get money from the reservation, or if they're part of a tribe, then they can get that like kickback money. But like the government of course is like, oh no, you have to be 1,000, like, you know, or no, like you have to be a quarter, you know, of your DNA that has to be to that tribe or whatever. But then it was like back in the day, like when they were making laws against Black people and like they were only like 2/3 of people, or not even considered like, they were like slaves. Like that was like the one drop rule. Like if you had one drop of black DNA, or if you had any little bit of you. So it's like they just are able to like really exploit it. And right now they're like being shitty with like using this example, like they're trying to like actually help people, but that is again just propaganda, and it's bullshit.
Deceased, they can't use the traditional STR testing to prove paternity. But you could very easily use a second degree relative with full confidence in SNP testing. But the courts haven't started embracing SNP testing yet for identity proof. Now, that's good for investigative genetic genealogy because we're more than happy to just be used as a lead generator or a tip and not used as evidence. But it really is important that for other purposes like paternity testing, that they start expanding and using more genetic markers like we do for SNPs. And so it is more reliable because it's so much information, right? There's no way you're going to accidentally match at 850,000 locations. With someone, or even half of that, or even a quarter of that. And so STRs have proven to be very unique and very, very high confidence. I think we've all heard when they say there's a 1 in 320 trillion chance that this DNA belongs to anyone other than the suspect. So obviously it works very well when you can do that direct comparison. Where it doesn't work as well is when you're doing these more distant relative comparisons. And that's also been an issue with Jane and John Doe's in the past, because you need that first degree relative to make that legal identification. But with genetic genealogy, we're able to use much more distant relatives to prove who that is, basically.
Right. So what happened in the Kohburger case pretty much follows the line of what you had said. They started with trying the STR, running it through the CODIS database. They got no hits. And that would typically be someone who is already in the database because they've already been convicted, or because DNA has already been gathered from a crime scene. So all that means is that person had never had their DNA gathered from a crime scene and had never been convicted of a crime. So their DNA was not in the database. So then the state moved to exactly what you're talking about. They moved to using the investigative genetic genealogy and trying the SNP method. Now, they had the SNP made at an outside lab. That may not be the right word. Is that what what's
right? And that's because, as I mentioned, none of the crime labs yet have the capability to create SNP profiles. So they have to send it to a third-party private lab. That's the only choice right now. I'm sure that will change in the future, where law enforcement will start having their own technology and equipment to do this. But at this point, that hasn't happened yet.
Right. Okay. So do you want to walk us through some of your other slides and kind of talk us through? You now have the case. You have the.
Oh shit. Okay, so that's where it starts getting boring. But so what she just basically said is that they did not get a hit for Bryan, and that they ended up using IgG like to identify him. Well, you can't do that. Like you can only use it as supporting evidence. This cannot be the thing that you're arresting someone on and like, charging them with murder off of. And she just said that. So but like what Bryan was arrested for like, or because of like the way that they got these like warrants, these search warrants. I'm wondering whether it was the chicken or the egg, but like, there's these cell phone data information. So they're like, so basically I think they were able to be like, can we do this with his DNA? Because we put him at all of these locations. And like with the location data, we were able to identify him. And but now as we come to find out, and like I'll go over kind of what I found out like through I'm gonna like rewatch the hearing with Ann Taylor, because one, I think we can read like a couple of those Idaho statesmans too, but like they used just the cell phone data, which I believe and I think is like fabricated information. Like I think the interview that she did with the detective last Thursday and the answers that he gave is like super sus, and it sounds like he manipulated the data and didn't back his shit up and just falsified and then took bullshit screenshots and like said and made that up in order to be able to get this DNA like tested or whatever. So and I haven't like completely figured out like how they did that 100%, because but I do feel like Bryan is probably maybe being framed. But I also feel like the police are for sure involved. Like even if Bryan is a part of it, like the police are for sure involved. But okay, so this part is boring. Oh yeah, wait. Did she say? Yeah, so at this point she does say they so they used his
Files that you
information.
need. What are you going to do next?
Okay, so then I say I'm sorry, I took notes on this. Okay, I took my notes are pretty mean. Okay, confused is stopped at around 13 members, or she talks about needing to check a box or whatever regarding if law enforcement can use. Okay, well let's just listen to this. Maybe she gives us more
To try to
information.
figure out whose DNA was present at the scene.
So I just want to make a note about the Kohburger case. A couple of things. One, I absolutely think the authorities did the right thing, moving immediately to investigative genetic genealogy when they didn't get that hit in CODIS. That is what I've been advocating for, because that's where we can have the biggest impact on public safety and make the most difference. We can potentially save lives and certainly keep these cases from going on for years and decades, like so many of the cases that I've been involved in. But they did send it out to a third-party lab because they had to. But then it came back in-house, meaning the FBI investigative genetic genealogy team are the ones that did the research. So the only part of it that was farmed out to a private lab or to a third party was just that analysis where they took the DNA, created the SNP profile, and then it came back to law enforcement.
Yeah, that's illegal, lady. What the hell? Okay, this is crazy. I mean, right? This is definitely illegal.
Enforcement themselves to do the research. And that's not always the case, because I've worked on hundreds of cases as an outsider. But I think that this will start being done increasingly by in-house law enforcement officials. And we've already seen that some with the FBI teams that are working around the country.
That's
Okay.
problematic.
Do you want me to put up the GED map slides? Okay.
So once that file is uploaded to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, it's compared against all of the people's files that are in there that have agreed to be compared against law enforcement. So in GEDmatch, if it's a violent criminal case, a suspect case, you have to check a box that says police, and only about a third of the database has done that. So we're comparing against only about 600,000 profiles. All of those profiles are going to come from either Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, or Family Tree DNA, because GEDmatch doesn't do any DNA testing. They're just a third-party DNA repository. So if you've tested anywhere else, you can download your raw data, upload it to GEDmatch, and you can decide if you want to be compared against these types of cases or not. If you don't check the box, then you can be compared against Jane and John Doe's and anyone who has uploaded for genealogical purposes like adoptees or say donor-conceived individuals. But to be compared against violent criminals, you have to check that box. So then we get this match list that looks something like this. It'll have a kit number, and then it'll have the person's name. Now they can put whatever name they want in, so it's not always straightforward. You can use an alias like Butterfly 45. You can use initials, which a lot of people do, or a code. You can just use anything you choose. And then there's an email address, and the email address is really key for us trying to identify who that DNA contributor is. And so we will use like reverse email lookup programs to do that. These are all public. I don't have access to anything that's not public record. So I'll use a company like Ben Verified, which is a people search database, and enter that email into their database. And then sometimes that will tell me who that belongs to. Next to that is you see GED. So if someone wants to be really helpful, they can upload their family tree information for us. It's called a GEDCOM. And that's what that GED means there. That is someone who has chosen to do that. And that makes our work so much easier, because I don't care who you are. All I care about is your tree. And so if you upload your tree information for me, I don't even have to spend time trying to figure out who you are, because that's not the important part. It's your ancestors that matter. But as you can see in this example, only one person has done that out of this whole list. And that's typical. Usually we'd have to scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. We might find maybe 5 people that have uploaded their family tree information for us. So the vast majority of the time, we have to build that tree. We have to identify that DNA contributor, figure out who their parents are and grandparents, and then build that tree back in time. It'll also tell us their gender, but that is self-inputted. So occasionally it doesn't match the genetics. So you have to take everything with a grain of salt. Autosomal DNA right there, it'll tell you how many centimorgans are shared of autosomal DNA, which is the type of DNA that we're testing. Those SNPs are autosomal. Autosomal is inherited from both your parents, as I discussed. You get about 25% from each grandparent, about 12.5% from each great-grandparent. They'll also tell us if the person shares any X DNA. It's more rare for them to share the X chromosome DNA, but if they do, and we're trying to identify a male, it can be really helpful because the male only gets X DNA from his mom's side. And so that helps us to narrow down which part of the family tree is shared. And then if we want to look at their shared DNA, we click on that 1-to-1 column and it'll show us exactly which chromosomes they share on and how long those shared segments are. I rarely do that. It's not really typically that important. What matters is how much DNA is shared. And that DNA amount then can help us predict their relationship. Up at the top there, that person shares 1,780, something like that. I can't quite see it, 1,735 centimorgans. So that's going to be a second degree relative. That's a really close match, and we're not normally going to have that. That would be, say, a grandparent, grandchild, niece, nephew, or could be a double first cousin. It's a really limited number of relationships. Oh, and it could be a half sibling. But when you look below that, that's more typical to what we're going to have. We'll usually have a top match that shares somewhere in the 100 centimorgan range, or maybe 200 if we're lucky. So we're going to be working with second, third, fourth, fifth cousins and beyond. If someone only shares about 100 centimorgans, that's a little more than 1%. They're probably a third cousin, which means we have to build back to all of their great-great-grandparents trying to find the common ancestor.
And is that about how close you usually get, second, third cousins, or are you able to take it further?
We're really excited if we get a second cousin or a couple second cousins, but most of the time they're going to be second cousins once removed and more distant. And
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, so I think, what she's saying there is she's saying that, like, the way that we were able to identify them is by going back 6 generations. Like, she just told us earlier in this interview that it's only legal to go back 1, to just do your parents. Like, so I just don't understand, like, why this is legal. It's so weird.
Drops down really quickly. So we're going to use maybe the top 12 matches, maybe the top 24 matches if we have quite a bit of good data. But once it drops down to say 50 centimorgans, you're starting to get really distant matches. And we will use those, but we typically use those as supporting matches, not our foundational matches. We really hope to have a match at least 70 centimorgans or so to be the foundation of our research, but you don't always get lucky like that. Sometimes they're very, very distant, even at the top.
When you say foundation, it's because it's at this point that you're going to begin using other types of ways to trace people?
Right. So this is really all I'm going to do with the DNA. And this is a big misconception that we really dig into people's DNA. As you can see, I don't have access to their DNA file. I don't have access to any of their medical risks or anything. I just know how much DNA they share with my unknown person. And then that tells me how closely or distantly related they are. And that's it. There really isn't
Yeah, but
any
the
digging
fucking
into
government
the DNA.
does.
From here on out, I'm using public
This is
records
so
to try to
stupid.
identify these people and build their family trees.
She's like, I don't have that information.
So
It's like,
should we go
dude,
to the
it's
next
not
slide?
about you having that information. It's about the government
Okay, so
having that
the
information,
concept
bitch. Like,
is
what are you
finding
talking
matches
about?
who share DNA with each other and my unknown person. Why? Because I'm hoping to find the common ancestors. And I can't find the common ancestor between my, say, match number 2 and my suspect because I can't build my suspect's family tree. So instead, I'm going to look on that list of matches, people who share DNA with the subject or suspect and with each other. Because if they share DNA with each other, they should have common ancestors in their family tree. And so in this case, match number 1 and match number 8, those are matches to our subject. They also share DNA with each other. So I build their trees back in time. And if all goes the way it's supposed to, I'm going to find their common ancestors. Once I find those common ancestors, it gives me one piece of our subject's family tree. And I can eliminate all the other branches of these matches family trees and focus in on this one set of common ancestors. Because now I have to identify the descendants of those common ancestors because typically he, should be among those descendants, right? If matches 1 and 8 both descend from the same great-great-grandparents and they both share DNA with the subject, there's a very good chance he also shares DNA with those ancestors.
And this 50 that they share, is that roughly a second cousin or third cousin?
No, that's like a third cousin once removed.
Okay.
And so they might be slightly closer related to our subject. So match number 1 there shares 114. That's like a second cousin once removed approximately, But the amount of DNA doesn't tell you exactly what the relationship is. There are multiple relationships that are possible for any amount of shared DNA, except parent, child, and full siblings. So there's ranges and averages, and there's multiple relationships that are genetically equivalent, like a second cousin once removed, a half second cousin, first cousin twice removed, or half first cousin twice removed. So there's a lot of different relationships we have to consider.
And what's the number you would have between two siblings again? Instead of 50, it would be what?
So it's a little bit complicated because full siblings share both half identical DNA and fully identical DNA. So in some regions, they're going to share the same DNA from mom or dad. In some regions, they're going to share the same DNA from both. So it's going to all add up to about 3,600 centimorgans. But on the match list, it'll often show around 2,300 because GEDmatch and family tree DNA don't count the fully identical areas. They just count where they have the same DNA on one chromosome, and they don't count when it's on both. So full siblings are not a great example because it is the one most confusing part of it. But if you go to first cousins, for instance, they're going to share 850 centimorgans on average. That's about 12.5% of DNA.
So the 50, what percentage could just be coincidence?
When you start getting down to like 20 centimorgans and below, it can be what's called identical by population group or by, there's IBD and IBS. It's called identical by state. Identical by state
I took
is,
notes
you
like the
call it a
last time that
coincidence, but it
I
really means
recorded
that
this,
two
and
people
I don't think
come from the
any
same
of this really
population group
matters.
at
So
some
I'm gonna
point in
just
their
skip
ancestry,
ahead
but it could be
to
many, many, many
around
generations
this
in
like
the
pretty
past.
laughable part.
Identical by descent means that shared DNA is because
where
you
she
have
talks
a
about
relatively recent common ancestor in your family tree. So maybe 8-10 generations, within 8 or 10 generations. And so it's very reliable down to about 20 centimorgans, but there are exceptions, which is way more than we want to get into today.
Okay, sure.
But you can feel good, 50 centimorgans and above, you have a really good chance of finding those common ancestors. Anything below that, the common ancestors may be really so far back in the tree that it's challenging or virtually impossible to identify them.
So you've got your two lines going to this pair.
Okay.
People in the past, it had never been charged, but that led them right to John D. Miller in April's case, way higher priority than his brother. And they also can look at phenotypes. That's a whole nother topic that you might want to talk about sometime. Is Parabon does phenotype predictions, meaning someone's physical traits from the same DNA information we get.
That's like Hitler shit to me.
So one of the brothers might have blue eyes and one might have brown, and Parabon may have predicted
do we
with
really
98%
want
confidence
the
that this is a person
government
with
to
brown
have
eyes
that
versus blue.
deep of
So then you would
information to be
downweight
able
the
to tell
brother with
what
blue
our
eyes.
like
And
physical
that is true
characteristics
for
are?
any
That's nuts.
investigation. We're able to do that, even if you can't narrow it down to brothers. Sometimes I can only narrow it to grandparents, and you have to look at all the first cousins or all the second cousins, and you can start narrowing down based on their physical traits as well.
Right. One of the questions that I got from folks, Carol Cat and the Banshee Rose had a real high-level discussion about the databases that are used in the kind of work that you do and which ones can be used and which ones can't. Carol Cat said,
Great
who
question.
is apparently a fellow genetic genealogist, but from the other side of the world, wanted to know what do you use in the U.S.? What can we use here? What can't we use? And so,
well, it's true across the world right now that the only databases that are available to use for investigative genetic genealogy are GEDmatch and family tree DNA. So we cannot access Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, or MyHeritage for law enforcement. And that is because their terms of service all bar that use. And we should all be following the rules. I mean, it's not important, as it's not only important to have a high level of skill and experience to do this work, but it's also important to follow best practices, high standards, and act ethically. And so that means we have to stick to those two databases that have notified their users that law enforcement is using those databases and given people the opportunity to opt in or opt out of having their DNA compared. Everyone should have the right, in my opinion, to decide if their DNA is compared against these profiles. The only one who gives up their right to that is the perpetrator, who leaves their DNA behind it.
Bitch, what are you talking about? I mean, does she not understand like how that does not make sense? Like, I just am like, no, that's not. And why isn't Harvard lawyer Lee here, like calling her out on this? Like, I mean, is just like you're giving a lecture about ethics right now and like what you can or can't use. Like, but you're going behind the law and like doing like the government and like the law enforcement like illegal. It's just it's
Crime
weird.
scene. And so it's important that we do that. There aren't other databases out there. This is really a US based thing. 4 of the databases are in the US and 1 is in Israel. And MyHeritage is the one that's in Israel, and they don't allow law enforcement use. And so right now, that means we're really limited. Instead of comparing against over 40 million people, we're comparing against less than 2 million people, much less on suspect cases.
So let me ask, we'll switch over, go a little out of order. I have some questions about the privacy issues and the controversy around some of this type of work by.
Okay, so I also have the question about like, she's like, oops, sorry, she just, okay, what did she just say? That sounded really weird.
So let me ask, we'll switch over, go a little out of order. I have some questions about the privacy issues and the controversy around some. So let me ask, we'll switch.
The fuck?
switch over, go a little out of order. I have some questions about
Oh my
the
God, that's
privacy
annoying.
issues and the controversy around.
And one of them had been accused.
Oh my God, why is this so
Right.
hard?
One of the questions that I got from folks, Carol Cat and the Banshee Rose had a real high level discussion about the databases that are used in the kind of work that you do and which ones can be used and which ones can't.
Oh yeah,
Carol Cat,
so this is what
who
it
is
sounds.
apparently a fellow genetic genealogist, but from the other side.
It sounds like what she said there is that they basically America is the only country that is allowing this to be tested for law enforcement to use it. Like, hello, that's like crazy. So we are literally the only country in the world that is like allowing this type of genetic. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but that's what it sounds like she's saying right here. Oh my God, why do I suck at this so bad? This is pissing me off. Oh my God. This is crazy.
Thing. 4 of the databases are in the US and 1 is in Israel. And MyHeritage is the one that's in Israel, and they don't allow law enforcement use. And so right now, that means we're really limited. Instead of comparing against over 40 million people, we're comparing against less than 2 million people, much less on suspect cases.
So let me ask, we'll switch over, go a little out of order. I have some questions about the privacy issues and the controversy around some of this type of work by law enforcement. And some of the critiques have been that while there may be agreements in place that say law enforcement can't use this particular database, maybe the company gets sold, maybe there's a merger, maybe there's some kind of sharing between the databases that wasn't supposed to happen, or maybe there's a hack on the computer database and data is stolen from that. What is the thought within your community on what the response to that is?
Well, so 2 of the databases, the 2 largest ones, Ancestry and 23andMe, don't allow any sort of uploading of outside data into their system. You have to actually test through them, and they don't share DNA with each other. And so if you've tested there, you can download your data and upload it to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, but you can't upload into their databases. So that makes them much more secure. They're also both billion-dollar plus companies, and they have very good security. They have deep pockets to fight any law enforcement efforts to get in their database. So those 2 are relatively secure. But MyHeritage is quite different because they do accept uploads from outside databases or outside sources. And so they're vulnerable. They're an example of where someone might believe they're not being compared against law enforcement cases, and they might be. Because if someone is breaking the rules and being unethical, they could upload one of these files into the MyHeritage database and get a match list. And they've got about 6 million people in their database. And so you're going to get a lot more matches typically, and probably closer matches if you were able to compare against them. I'm strongly against doing something like that because the people in that database have not consented to that use and haven't been notified of that use. But it's a really sticky situation because if MyHeritage doesn't stop accepting uploads, it's very hard for them to protect themselves from that access. Now, if you're trying to upload a file that's very degraded or has a lot of issues with it, they'll reject it, because when you spit in a tube or swab your cheek, you're going to have a really high quality, optimal DNA sample. These law enforcement ones are often not optimal. And so those they'll be able to reject. But if it's a more recent crime or you just happen to get a really great DNA sample, then they're not going to be able to tell the difference between that and someone legitimately testing. And so it is a concern. And I think that people need to be aware that if they're in a database that accepts uploads, it is possible that their DNA could be compared against. And I think it's unfortunate, but it is the truth.
I guess I'm worried that a database that doesn't currently accept uploads might decide to accept uploads in the future. While that may be their current posture, if they get taken over, if they get bought by the one that does, maybe they change their policy. Maybe the safety and security of the data that you've uploaded is different.
Okay, yo, so like I understand that and like what they're saying there, but it's also like, why aren't you concerned about the ones that they are using? Like, that's awesome that we have these billion-dollar companies that have our back and like aren't gonna share information. But what about all these other companies that like are doing that? Like, so just because they aren't being like they aren't sticking up to the government as much or whatever, like so it's just makes no sense to me. I like still, yeah, I don't get it.
It would be. So if they do that and they're following the rules and the laws in many states, they would have to give their users the opportunity to remove their data. And so there are quite a number of states that have now passed a law that says you absolutely have to be able to remove your data. Right now, you do have that ability of any of the companies. If for any reason you want to take your DNA out of their database and have it destroyed, you can do that. So if, say, 23andMe was sold, which I don't see happening, but say it happened, say, one of these companies went bankrupt and their database was sold, there is a requirement for them to alert their users if they're changing their terms of service. And then their customers could remove their data if they didn't want to be part of that pool. Or they might allow an opt-out. Like at Family Tree DNA, you can completely opt out of having your DNA used, even if it's in the.
Okay, so I'm wondering with all of this then is like why she is Okay, shit. Why did I just forget what I was talking about?
Heritage doesn't stop accepting uploads. It's very hard for them to protect themselves from that access. Now, if you're trying to upload a file that's very degraded or has a lot of issues with it, they'll reject it, because when you spit in a tube or swab your cheek, you're going to have a really high quality, optimal DNA sample. These law enforcement ones are often not optimal. And so those they'll be able to reject. But if it's a more recent crime, or you just happen to get a really great DNA sample, then they're not going to be able to tell the difference between that and someone legitimately testing. And so it is a concern. And I think that people need to be aware that if they're in a database that accepts uploads, it is possible that their DNA could be compared against. And I think it's unfortunate, but it is the truth.
I guess I'm worried that a database that doesn't currently accept uploads might decide to accept uploads in the future. While that may be their current posture, if they get taken over, if they get
Okay, yeah. So it's kind of like who are these people that have? It's like she's like, oh, everyone has a right to, decide whether or not their DNA is used for this purpose. But then it's kind of like, but who are these people that have added their genes to the DNA to the database? They have, apparently like 6 cousins now that are being identified because they decided that this was okay. Like, we don't even know these people, and like they're saying it's okay to use our DNA. Like, that seems like, again, another huge government overreach with all of this. It's like it's not ethical.
American Society of Human Genetics, and they brought in stakeholders from all different walks of life to discuss these issues long before law enforcement was using it. And we met with more protected.
And what about this concern? Because while people may have the opportunity to opt in or out for their own data and their own DNA information, my siblings' decision to opt in might as well be my decision to opt in, and especially my sister. So that would be my decision. And even though I didn't want that, so can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's where it really starts getting difficult to navigate the ethics of this situation in this field. We all share DNA with our relatives. So if we are making that decision, we are making that decision for all of our relatives out to about second cousins, because everyone's second cousins once removed and closer will share DNA. So if your second cousin has agreed to be in one of these databases and allow law enforcement access, you are going to be identified. And even though they only share 3% of your DNA on average, we're going to find you if your second cousin is in there. That's almost for sure, unless you're adopted out or you have a misattributed paternity in your tree or something that breaks that connection. But as long as that connection exists in public records, we'll find you. Now, is that okay? Well, I mean, it really comes down to what our society has decided for personal rights. We all have the individual right to decide what we do with our own bodies and our own DNA. And so that is having consequences for the privacy of our families now. There's different types of cultures and the way things like that are dealt. So years ago, I was involved in a committee with the American Society of Human Genetics, and they brought in stakeholders from all different walks of life to discuss these issues long before law enforcement was using it. And we met with some tribal leaders and tribal members of Native American tribes or First Nations. And they said that in their community, they all make these decisions collectively. You're not supposed to make individual decisions that affect your entire tribe or your entire community. So they have a different way of approaching it. And what they explained was, if you're a tribal member and you want to do something like this, you would sit down with your tribe and have this discussion, and it would be a collective decision instead of an individual decision. And so we don't see a lot of Native American tribal members testing, and that is typically because of the policies and the decisions that they've made collectively.
Yeah, because they're smart and they know how the US government has totally screwed them over in the past, and they are like, you are not going to use our DNA for any type of purposes. It's just like, and like she's telling this, and it's just like she doesn't get it at all. It's crazy.
For those of us that don't have that type of culture and that type of system in our community, we're making these decisions individually. And that is partly what America's built on, right? That we have rights. We have a lot of personal rights. And in this particular case, those rights, by exercising those individual rights that we have, we are infringing on our relatives' rights. So who gets to decide what's more important, the individual decisions and right to do what we want from what we choose with our DNA? Or is it more important that our families get to weigh in on that? And everyone can decide that for themselves right now. It can be a family decision if that's what a family decides, but there's no legal way.
No, it can't, lady. Like, what is the family that has even decided to do this? We don't even know. It sounds like they're like literally like 3 or 4 generations back. How can you as a family opt out to do that? Like, what the hell is she talking about?
To stop somebody from making a decision you don't like in regard to DNA.
In the briefing that was done in the Kohburger case, the defense cited this is close to a quote, a Florida police officer obtaining a warrant for the entire GEDmatch database, even though users chose to opt out. Are you familiar with that case, and do you think that poses a risk?
It was my case, and there's a lot, unfortunately, that I can't reveal, but I can tell you absolutely nobody's privacy was invaded in that case. And there's 2 very good reasons why that's true, and I just don't know what I'm allowed to say.
The entire
okay, well, I don't mean to put you in a bad position.
Dude, what is she saying? Like, they literally compared it to the entire database, including the people that said that they didn't want to be used for that purpose. What is she saying?
Position.
Yeah, that it looked really bad. And that is one of my concerns about people
It
using
didn't
best
look bad,
practices
bitch.
and
It
always
is
thinking
bad.
before you act. How would you feel if what you're about to do is on the front page of the New York Times? Because it just might be.
What?
And
Right.
if it looks bad, you shouldn't do it because it can really harm this field. It can harm the public's trust in what we're doing.
It doesn't. It is bad. How if it looks bad? I don't understand what she's saying. Like basically, like, okay, make sure that you do it so it doesn't like look as bad, so people don't talk about it because we want to keep it on the down low. Like, what are you're saying this like, without a thought or care in the world, lady? Like, what? That was.
And this tool relies entirely on public participation and support. And so if you lose the public's trust, we will lose this incredibly valuable and powerful tool. So that was a misstep. But it was also very early on. And it's greatly discouraged now in the law enforcement community to do anything like that. This has been a learning experience for everyone involved, particularly law enforcement, because this was brand new to them 5 years ago. It burst on the scene with the Golden State Killer case. And suddenly it was this whole new field and technique that was available to law enforcement, and they knew nothing about it. It didn't come from forensic science. It didn't come from law enforcement. It came from citizen scientists like myself that developed this tool. And by the time most people became aware of it, it was already this incredibly powerful tool for any type of human identification. And so that meant that early on, there were some missteps. We've all been learning as we go, and that was definitely a misstep. I hope very much that nothing like that ever happens again. But if someone tried that now, I think the entire community would object to it. And if they tried to do that at one of the big companies like Ancestry or 23andMe, as I mentioned, they have very deep pockets and very powerful law firms and legal teams, and they have vowed to vigorously fight any efforts of law enforcement to get into their databases. I can't say it's impossible, but I think it's highly unlikely.
And speaking about sort of the repercussions that ripple out from some of these things, the Kohburger case has a lot of really important arguments that are being made because they are going to affect future cases. It's very public, and these arguments are going to be made over and over. And I have a question. One of the defense has asked what would probably be pretty standard questions for defense side attorneys to ask, like, show me the searches you did, show me the tree that you created, show me the documents around your investigation. And the position and most importantly, probably all the persons who were found to share sufficient centimorgans so that I can take a look at those and see whether or not they can also be potential suspects in the case. So in the government, the state has opposed that and made the argument that I think makes sense from what you're saying, has made the argument that it isn't really about the search for it, it's about the person. And then when you find the person, you compare their DNA and either it matches or it doesn't. So the process to get there doesn't really matter. But my question is this, if it's so unimportant, why not just produce that? Why not just produce the tree, show people how you got there? Why would you not show your work?
Because we need to protect the privacy of the matches and their extended families. They have not done anything wrong, and they shouldn't be pulled into a trial, and certainly not a high-profile trial like this. So if the court in the Kohburger case follows already established precedent, then they will rule that those are not discoverable because they are not evidence. They are not going to be used against the suspect in a court of law. They are not the reason that he was arrested. That DNA match to his father, and then the swab they took directly from him are the reason he is being charged with this crime. And so none of what I do or any other genetic genealogist is going to be used against that suspect in any way. It's just a tip. Like I said, it's like if someone called into Crime Stoppers. And so the reason that
is
the prosecutors and DAs have fought so hard to protect the privacy of the
dude, what is she saying? Listen to what she just said.
And the position and most importantly, probably all the persons.
Why is Harvard literally not calling her out on this shit? This
so that I can take a look at those and see whether or not they could also be potential suspects in the case. So in the government, the state has opposed that and made the argument that I think makes sense from what you're saying, has made the argument that it isn't really about the search for it, it's about the person. And then when you find the person, you compare their DNA and either it matches or it doesn't. So the process to get there.
Okay, again, the Fourth Amendment, like you're searching shit that people have not allowed you to search. Like, how did you get that information? You know what I mean? Like, and then, like, how do they not realize that that's, and like, also it's like completely, to me, this sounds like they just don't want to show that they're like illegally uploading DNA into databases they're not supposed to be doing. Like, to me, that sounds exactly what they did.
Doesn't really matter. But my question is this, if it's so unimportant, why not just produce that? Why not just produce the tree, show people how you got there? Why would you not show your work?
Because we need to protect the privacy of the matches and their extended families. They have not done anything wrong, and they shouldn't be pulled into a trial, and certainly not a high-profile trial like this. So if the court in the Kohburger case follows already established precedent, then they will rule that those are not discoverable because they are not evidence. They are not going to be used against the suspect in a court of law. They are not the reason that he was arrested. That
But
DNA
they
matched
are.
to his father, and then the swab they took directly from him are the reason he is being charged with this crime. And so none of what I do or any other genetic genealogist is going to be used against that suspect in any way. It's just a tip. Like I said, it's like if someone called into Crime Stoppers. And so the reason that the prosecutors and DAs have fought so hard to protect the privacy of those matches is because if those identities were to come out, it would be much less likely that anyone would want to upload to GEDmatch and opt in to this type of matching. It could really have an incredibly chilling effect on this amazing tool and being able to help solve these cases and get violent criminals off the streets. And so there was a judge in California that ruled they were basically confidential genetic informants, that they needed their identities protected in the same way that a confidential informant would. So say that someone was charged with a crime like this and they somehow got off and they were actually guilty, maybe a technicality or some other reason. Maybe the prosecution didn't put on a good case. And then they knew exactly which of their relatives were the ones that were partially responsible for their identification.
Dude,
that doesn't seem like a very good situation, does it?
Who
would want that? And so they're trying to protect the tool and the technique within the confines of the law, of course. And so in the 70 or so convictions that we've seen in our cases so far, the precedent and the case law has been consistent. All of the judges have ruled in the same way so far. That's not to say that could never change, but there's much more precedent and case law out there than most people realize. These cases have been mostly quietly working their way through the courts. Most of them are not going to ever get the kind of attention that the Idaho case is getting. And so I think most people just aren't aware that judges have weighed on this. And what that has meant is that even though I've been on hold for dozens and dozens of jury trials to testify, I've been canceled every single time. And I've never ended up testifying in front of the jury.
Actually
now, I have
used you, people would realize that it's illegal. Like, how does she not realize what she's saying?
But never in open court in front of a jury hearing a case like this. We don't expect that that's going to change, but you never know. Of course, any judge can make a different ruling. But so far, this is what we're seeing.
Could be constitutional
over and over and over these same types of decisions.
So what about this argument that if law enforcement never has to show how it reached its conclusion, how do we know that law enforcement didn't just go on the sites that it wasn't supposed to and search there and go ahead and get the data there and just say, yep, we found it, now we confirmed it, but having violated the process?
So that's a great question. Well, there have been no laws that meant they had to follow terms of service. So even if they did do that, it wasn't illegal and it wouldn't get anyone off because it's not fruit of a poison tree if it's not illegal. Law enforcement's argument is that they can do anything the public can do. So if the public can access a database, then law enforcement should be able to access that database. And that's been upheld in lots of case law and other applications. And so that is why we need laws that make it illegal to use databases that are not consented for this purpose. And so a handful of states have passed those. Now, I worked very closely on the Utah law, and we enshrined those terms of service into law. If you were to do that in Utah now, it actually would be a problem. Now, it is written into the law that it would get somebody off still, though. So it's something that could be, that they would, how do I say it, be punished for, but not get a defendant off if that happened. And so, yes, they could use databases they're not supposed to, but as I mentioned, there really isn't a way to get it into the databases that don't accept outside data. So it's a question of uploading against terms of service at MyHeritage, or you could upload against terms of service at GEDmatch and compare against the people that are not opted in, and it still wouldn't be illegal. So I don't think anyone would be getting off for that reason. So I don't really think it would help the defense. I'm not a lawyer, but this is the way it's been explained to me, is that if that's not illegal, law enforcement is technically allowed to do it. I just don't think it's a good idea for the survival of the tool, and I don't think it's ethical, but it's not illegal.
Right. I guess I see it more as a question of oversight of the government. And so to the extent that they're required to show their work, that they're required to either report to the judge or report to the defense as to what they've actually done, there's some oversight there, even if you're right, that I think it ultimately would not change the end result if they, in fact, manage to match the DNA with the person.
Well, I think that's why I have testified in front of some judges and grand juries to explain my work and explain how I developed the tip that I provided to law enforcement that ultimately led to that subject being arrested and charged. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As long as those are sealed and they're not available to the public and the media, there's no problem with that.
Dude,
the problem is when it gets into
why do we not want this in the media and to the public? Like, why? This is exactly what they're doing in the Kohburger case for Thursday, and this is the DNA information that they're sealing. And the reason that they're sealing it is because they don't want to show that they've falsified this DNA information and that they actually used, just some bullshit. And also DNA can be messed with a lot these days. If you have just a super tiny little thing, you can expand it to be these stems or whatever they're saying here. So I feel like that's definitely what they're going to talk about on Thursday.
To the suspect's own hands, right? I mean, are people going to want to participate in these databases if they end up having a cousin who's a serial killer and that they become aware that they had something to do with their identification. Now, they're never going to be solely responsible for their identification, which is another thing it's important to understand, is these cases aren't solved on one match. We're using many, many matches often. We're always going to use more than one match to develop our hypothesis. So there's never just one relative that is responsible for the identification of their cousin or their relative. But it still could be pretty daunting if your name comes out as the person that identified a very violent or helped to identify a very violent individual.
No, that is
It's,
such
you know, it's
bullshit.
why a lot of my, I should say my whole team doesn't want to be known. So I have 3 other genetic genealogists that work with me, and all 3 of them have made the decision they don't want their names out.
Probably because they know like how shady this is. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I almost feel like they could like end up getting in trouble with like the law. Like, I don't know.
Because we have seen some cases where we've helped identify someone and that person was either charges were dropped or they decided not to prosecute for whatever reason. And so my colleagues don't want those potentially violent criminals to know their identities and know that their work had something to do with their arrest. One example of that is in Oklahoma. We had a case that was prior to the Supreme Court decision about the tribal lands there. I don't know all the details. I can't explain it really well, but he had been charged with a crime. And then the borders changed and the jurisdiction changed because of the Supreme Court's decision about tribal courts and which land actually belonged to these tribes. And that meant that this person was let go. And they were so far never recharged because now it's up to the tribal courts to charge them and they haven't done so. And this person is a very dangerous person, even if they weren't responsible for the crime that we were involved in.
What, even if they weren't? So okay, so they're using, dude, that sounds so backwards what she just said right there. Like, she's saying like that they basically used his DNA from somewhere else to match it to the crime scene, which is like what they did with Bryan. And I feel like they're so far getting off because like the cases that they're using, they're like, oh, these are like, you know, just people that are dangerous and we're doing the whole world a favor. But like, that's not why they're trying to keep it hidden from us. Like, that's not why they're trying to like keep it behind, like on the lock. Like, they're trying to keep it that way because they don't want us to know, because we know that no one would agree to that. Do we really want the like government having that much information? I mean, that's completely against, you know, the like, I don't know, the Fourth Amendment. Like, this is I just don't think it's fair. So
working. And so it's just a very daunting thing for people to be identified as being involved in this. Now, I've chosen to be public because I want to educate the public. I want to dispel misconceptions and help people to make these choices. I want them to be informed, educated choices when they decide whether or not they want to help support this actively by participating and uploading their DNA. But most of the people that do this work do not want to be known. And so I can understand if they're afraid to be known, how would people's own family members feel about being outed in these cases?
Although it could be handled with a protective order. So there is, granted, it would have to be case by case. It would in every case have to be the decision of the court that there would be a protective order granted in that case. There might be some kind of policy that could be put in place, but it doesn't have to be public to be given to the defense. Those two things could happen separately.
Yeah, and I think that would be completely okay with everyone involved. And as I said, some judges have looked at our work and decided that it wasn't going to be released to the defense. And so that is a very viable way of handling this. But as soon as it's released to the defense, there is some risk involved there. And sure, if the person's convicted and they're behind bars the rest of their life, that's one thing. But we don't always know absolutely that that's going to be the case. And then the media, we've seen the media get a hold of, early on, our reports were not as privatized as they are now. And so the reports that we wrote for law enforcement did include some match names and families. And we saw that the media got a hold of some of those reports. And some of the matches' names came out. And so, like I said,
how did that happen when it was only the government that had that information? They were choosing to not share it with the defense. It wasn't the defense leaking this information. It was the government. She's literally calling out the government, being like, oh, you know, it was supposed to be privatized, but for some reason, somehow it still got leaked, even though we only gave it to the government. It's like, dude, are you seriously this stupid? Like, what is going on? It's
been a learning experience. Now we are extremely careful with privatizing even our reports. We thought that our reports would be completely private and just law enforcement would have access. But sometimes things leak to the media. Sometimes the media gets a hold of things you don't expect. We learned very quickly. And so that has made us protect the match identities, even in what we share with law enforcement.
And I do know that early on, there was some reporting that Bryan Kohburger's sisters had lost their jobs as a result of their relationship with him. I don't even know if that was true. I just saw some reports about that.
Harvard
but I can
literally
certainly
is
see where
adding,
people might not want to be
problem.
associated with someone who was charged with a heinous crime.
Sorry that you don't want to be associated with someone that is a violent criminal, but like, just like there's so many other situations where this is like, you know, I mean, even if it's like DNA isn't used, you're still going to be identified as that person's, like, you know, relative. Like, this makes zero logical sense. Like, it's crazy.
I mean, the good news is the vast majority of the time on these cases, the matches don't even know the suspect. They've never met them. They're second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth cousins. And so they have no relationship with them. So it's not.
So, okay, where are you getting this? Why are like third, fourth, fifth, sixth cousins like giving the rights to my DNA? I don't even know this person. Who even is that person? Like, I mean, is this true? Like, or does it actually go back to like the 1930s people? Like, this is just so confusing.
Typically, a big deal for them as far as having a family member identified. But occasionally we do get a much closer match. Occasionally we get a parent-child match. We've seen cases where we get a match to mom and son gets arrested ultimately for a crime. And, that is devastating. I think, though, the vast majority of people recognize that if someone is capable of that type of violent crime, that they need to be identified and they need to be removed from society. If you're a very close family member, that's obviously going to be an extremely difficult situation, but that is rare and it is the exception. But I think we all need to remember that most people are victimized by someone close to them.
What
Not
the
stranger
fuck is she
danger the vast
talking about,
majority of the
dude?
time. And so if you have somebody who is capable of this type of violent crime, which is the only type of crime we
She's using
use
scare
genetic
tactics
genealogy
to
for,
like get people
do
to
you want them
agree to
around your
shit
vulnerable
that they
family
shouldn't
members? Do
be
you want
agreeing
them
to,
around your
that they
loved ones,
haven't
your
agreed
children,
to.
your grandma? I think people need to think very carefully about the answer to that, because many of these people we've helped identify in these cases turned out they were also victimizing their families behind closed
Dude,
doors.
it's
And that's
not
that
only
surprising.
about that. She is using these cases as like, scare tactics again. These are very like individualized cases that like they can use this shit for so much more than just this. Like, yeah, maybe it's easy to say like, okay, we need to put this person away, but it's kind of like, you can also falsify DNA. She's talking, okay, dude, what she said is that like the government cannot use IgG. And so what they do is that they end up taking DNA from the government. They have no way to check that information is validated. You could give her any DNA that you wanted to, meaning someone could like literally be working for the police and be like, oh, I am gonna go give this DNA. It is my neighbors who I don't like at all, and I want to like get him for this crime, and then give that to this company and have them make these matches. Like, so with I feel like, and then they're talking about for these purposes they want to keep it hidden, but it's kind of like, dude, no, like, why are you the reason why you're trying to keep that hidden from like the actual like like court is because you falsified information. You can't prove this. Like, it's just like, I don't know. I guess I'm maybe like,
Let me ask you two last questions. This one from History Underfoot, one of the subscribers. How did you get interested in this type of work?
okay, this is
That's much more than we have time for. But for me personally, I just loved genetics and I loved genealogy. And so when those two things converged and Family Tree DNA started offering DNA tests for family history purposes, that to me was just amazing. They were the first company that offered that. They started in 2000, and that opened up this entire amazing field. Very early on, I saw that the potential was virtually unlimited for genetic genealogy and human identification. And I've always liked mysteries. I was a little girl who read every single Nancy Drew by the time I was like 6 or 7. I love puzzles, love mysteries. And so I knew that genetic genealogy was going to do much more than just identify long dead ancestors, and that we were going to be able to do some pretty amazing things. So I jumped in with both feet. I mean, I made a lot of sacrifices. I had a company with my partner and I pretty much stopped doing all my work and dumped it all on him. And I volunteered and worked probably 100 hours a week for no money for a couple of years, until I was the first person to call myself a professional genetic genealogist and start actually getting paid to do the work. So I had to absolutely blaze my own trail. It's much easier now, but it's still not easy because there's still no turnkey formal path to becoming a genetic genealogist. There's still no degree you can go get. You can't go to college and major in genetic genealogy, at least not yet. But there are many more educational resources. There's great webinars, YouTube. There are classes you can go take, not full degrees, but classes. And so if someone wants to do this now, they just need to really immerse themselves in it. And they need to be self-starters. They need to find opportunities for learning and also for practicing. You don't want to practice on law enforcement cases, right? So you need to first work with your own DNA and then your family's DNA if they'll allow you. And then you can volunteer to help people with their own family mysteries. And so everyone who's doing this work now has spent years.
No, they don't want to train a bunch of people into it because all these people, more people would find out. I bet they're pissed
where you can
that
just
she did this.
get a job doing this and start making money right off the bat. There's a lot of sacrifice that happens before you get to that point.
Well, that was actually the second question I was going to ask. I want to say thanks to Joe. I appreciate that. From Ask Iota and D. Kohler, they both wanted to know about getting into the field. And D. Kohler just went straight for, how can she come work for you? She's willing to relocate.
Well, I work from home on my laptop all day, every day. So I don't really have a way to have a staff or have people write to me all the time and ask similar things. Parabon doesn't allow me to use any volunteers either. It's a for-profit company, so we can't use volunteers for what would be paid work. So that really limits what I'm able to do as far as help. So I have 3 other genetic genealogists, but I'm the only full-time genetic genealogist at Parabon. I could definitely use the help, but there's no mechanism to be able to get help like that. And so we have to hire people and bring them on. And that means we have to have the casework and the company income to sustain that. And so it means I end up doing the vast majority of the casework myself, and I work very, very long hours. If people want to learn to do this, as I said, they need to first learn how to do adoption work. And I have a huge Facebook group called DNA Detectives. It's over 200,000 members now, where people are learning to do this themselves, and people are volunteering to help others solve their own family history. So that's one way that you can get some experience doing this. You can also volunteer for DNA Doe Project and go straight into working Jane and John Doe cases, but they have a very long waiting list, so it's gotten difficult to get in there. You could go take the Ramapo College Investigative Genetic Genealogy course. It's brand new. In fact, I'm going to be speaking as their keynote at the end of the month in July in New Jersey. July 28th, I think it starts. That's a conference just on investigative genetic genealogy, but they also offer a program that you can sign up for that is, I think, a couple of months. So it's not a degree program, but it's basically the best you can get at the moment if you're really interested in this. And then the genealogical institutes all offer genetic genealogy courses that last a week. So all of those things are ways in, but one of the most important things I think is interacting with the community that is already doing this work. Everybody who's doing this work has gone that route. I can't think of anybody who just independently got into it without any interaction or support from the community. And it's a field that is very much on Facebook. So basically, it always has been. It started with
it's a field on Facebook. Okay,
Yahoo
that's a red flag.
Forums, and then moved over to Facebook, and that's where so much of the genetic genealogy learning is going on, and sharing and support. And
it sounds like all of this just sounds like
bonds are built. So if you're not on Facebook, it's going to be a little bit tougher. If you are on there, then you may want to go join some of these groups. I have a group called Investigative Genetic Genealogy.
Like people are being trained on
that is where a lot of
Facebook.
these
Someone
cases
just
get
invented this science. People are going behind the doors of like you can't even check
Thank you so
like
much for coming on the show. I feel
who
like
and where this DNA is coming from. Like it's just does. There's so many.
I forgot to put my own conference, Institute for Genetic Genealogy. I do a conference, and you can check it out at i4gg.org. We're gonna.
Okay, yeah. So that was that thing, and then I'm glad that I finished that. So I think I'm like just kind of feeling like whatever right now. And it's been like 2 hours. I was thinking that I would like wanted to get through and bust through a bunch more, but I think I will like prep for tomorrow and then schedule a live sometime tomorrow during the day, maybe probably, and then go through the cast information and how I found out like how the cast information is also falsified. And I feel like I have some training. I did a lot of research that involved similar programs, and I can imagine exactly like what he's describing. It took me a couple of times to go back over like the hearing that went on last Thursday. But I think I was able to actually kind of get to the bottom of it, and I think that it's very obvious that like in both of these situations with just the cell phone data and just the DNA, like both times they've been it sounds like they don't have the actual data to back up either of them, and it seems like because that's the reason, because the like law enforcement probably falsified this information. So I mean, I'll try to get more into it tomorrow, and like I said, do some research tonight and schedule it for tomorrow. Maybe I'll say like maybe I should just schedule it right now sometime tomorrow afternoon, but I don't want to do that and change my mind. So but maybe I just will. Okay, I'm just gonna like schedule a live for tomorrow afternoon at I'm gonna say 3:30. No, I'm gonna say 3 o'clock tomorrow, Central Standard Time. So sorry this video isn't that great, but hopefully this video is great, and I hope that you agree with my perspectives and that you enjoyed hearing my side of things, and hopefully I will see you again in the future. Okay, bye.